Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, you may notice I sound a bit chipper there. It's autumn. Autumn has arrived in Norbury. There's a rumour that Norbury's getting a Waterstones. Can you imagine? I think it's an incorrect rumour, Kieran. That's put a spring in my step. Just outside my window, I can see a beautiful attention-seeking cat having what I can only describe as an intimate wash. So I'm all's happy in the world of Kevin. But I don't know where you are, Kieran. There's a vague look at the hostage video about where you are, Kieran. I can see four blank walls and somebody holding up a newspaper. What's going on there?
I'm up in Liverpool.
Oh, lovely.
I've still not moved into my apartment 16 months after having an offer accepted. So I'm doing a tour of every single Airbnb and hotel in the Merseyside area, of which some are absolutely fantastic and some are not.
How you're not flagged up on the Merseyside police computer system, I don't know, Kieran. he turns up on a regular basis, goes to a different accommodation every time. He's only here for 2 days. He seems to know a lot about figures. He's a known associate of Uncle Terry, and yet still you can walk that street without the tap on the shoulder. And we need to get on with this, Kieran, because as we mentioned on Tuesday on our questions pod, there are some big news stories to unpack. And this first one wasn't even on the radar when I said that, regarding the transfer window. Quite a big story, Kieran. It hasn't got the traction yet that it will do.
Yes, it would appear that the Premier League has decided, after a bit of humming and hawing, to have the transfer window before the first ball is kicked. Now, we did have this situation about 5 or 6 years ago, and then the Premier League decided to reverse that. And people might be saying to themselves, hold on, you pride yourself on not being a football show, and this sounds like football transfer gossip, so should you not stay in your lane? But there are huge financial implications for this, because one of the reasons why the Premier League reverted to the end of August was a lack of consistency with Europe. So what happens if the Premier League window shuts before the first match takes place, and then a big European team comes in for one of your players, or the Saudi Pro League comes in for one of your players? You now can't replace them. So it becomes more difficult. Talking to or listening to some chief executives of clubs, they were reluctant to sign up to this. And part of the reason was, as one of them said to me, if the window shuts at the end of August, we've already played 3 Premier League games, so I'm effectively budgeting for 35 games. What happens if a player does a hamstring in those early matches? At least we've had the opportunity to replace them. We now potentially are going to need a slightly bigger squad as far as the start of the season is concerned, because we're playing more matches. So that's going to add to our costs. That's going to increase our budgets. Despite what everybody thinks, we're still losing money in the Premier League. So it's an intriguing position. Whether it's going to be coordinated across the rest of Europe, we will have to wait and see. And there has been talk of that, in which case it's not so much of an issue. But if I was Liverpool and you signed up your squad, and then a team from the Saudi Pro League in the middle of August puts an amazing offer for Mo Salah, or a player of that calibre, then Liverpool have got a problem. So if the solution is going to be an international one, I can see the merits. If it's just going to be the Premier League, we don't see any replication of this as far as the EFL is concerned. So it all gets slightly messy, and you wonder where the driving forces for this are coming from.
I was about to ask you just that, Kieran, because it's a story that only hit the public domain very recently, and it does make you wonder whether there's a specific club or a specific incident that has led to this, or whether this is something that's been on the agenda for quite some time and it's only now that it's been agreed on.
Well, sort of reading between the lines, I think some clubs are a little bit hacked off that they start off the season and they've got a rough idea of what they're going to do. And then another Premier League club comes in with a bigger budget and not say nicks one of your players, because ultimately it's an agreed decision between all three parties, but it has an impact upon the strategy. So you can understand why some of the non-big six clubs might be in favour of it, because it gives them greater certainty in terms of match one until January. You can also understand why perhaps some of the bigger clubs are in favour of it as well, because they know that they can afford to have a bigger squad because they've got the resources to do so, and that gives them a competitive advantage over what you might refer to as the middle classes of the Premier League and the clubs that have just been promoted, who are scrabbling around from. If you go up in the playoffs, you've got sort of 6 to 8 weeks in which to put together a squad.
As we mentioned at the end of our last pod, Kieran, we're awaiting news of a tribunal outcome, which we still are awaiting that news. Unfortunately, we even delayed recording this pod a little bit in the hope that it would come out. So I imagine we'll be finishing this about 5:10. So look out for that announcement about 5:15 when we're clearing up. But which potentially means that there won't be a transfer window full stop this time next season, because the whole system will have changed.
That's right. It's the Diarra case where a player who had a contract in Russia, he wanted to move. The club said no. He felt that his career was being stifled as a result of that. And he's used the same lawyer as we have for Bosman to effectively go up against FIFA. And I think he's also charging the Belgian league as well, so it's taking place in a EU court, to look at the validity of the transfer market in its present form. Is it a restraint of trade as a professional person? Because if I'm working in other industries, you work in the entertainment industry, you might have a contract. You don't have a 5 or an 8 year contract with a particular body. So you have a contract, and if you want to move on elsewhere, you're able to do so. It's the same with me. If another university wants to employ me, perfectly happy at Liverpool, by the way, then that can be organised, and you do a short period of notice and you move on. So if this case is successful, does it mean that the transfer system as we know is going to collapse? I don't think so. What it will, however, allow is FIFPro, which is the global trade union for footballers, and also the PFA. I think it gives them a stronger negotiating position in relation to looking after the interests of their members. So when we had Mahesa on the show a couple of months ago, he said, no, we don't want to get rid of the transfer system, but we do think there are some idiosyncrasies in it which don't work in favour of our members, and we might therefore want to come up with a new deal which looks after our members to a greater extent.
I love the fact, Kieran, that you are so honourable that in the same breath you said, hypothetically, that you might move to another university, and then realise that might seem like a veiled come and get me to other universities. So without even pausing, you said, I'm very happy at Liverpool. That's a mark of an honourable man there, Kieran. And also, mentioning European clubs as you did, I can't wait for Villa Bayern tonight. And God help me, this new Swiss model, it's growing on me, Kieran. I have to say, I don't know who I am. I feel like I'm in a Jekyll and Hyde situation. I've just taken the first inch of potion, and I'm starting to change into a rational, moderate man who sees UEFA's point of view. Although it wasn't as much fun last night. Ed got home early from a thing he had to do in the afternoon. We thought, out of solidarity with our family in Glasgow, we'll sit down and we'll watch Borussia Dortmund against Celtic, and we'll cheer on Celtic. And oh, hello, we seem to be 6 goals down after 25 minutes or whatever. The rumour mill, Kieran, went into full overdrive on Friday when the Premier League cancelled a vote on sponsorship deals within 40 minutes of it meant to be taking place. And then the rest of the country put 2 and 2 together and came up with the fact that must mean that Man City have already won their legal battle with the Premier League. What are your thoughts on that, Kieran?
Well, for those people not familiar with the broader story, what we have here is that completely independently, I think we really have to stress that, nothing to do with the 115 charges case, which is presently in week 3.5. I think that's as far as we've got. Completely independently of that, Manchester City have taken the Premier League to an arbitration hearing or mediation in respect of what's referred to as associated party transactions. And an associated party is a new phrase which the Premier League appears to have pulled out of its hat like a magician. And these are a set of rules that were introduced, not so coincidentally, with the takeover of Newcastle United by Saudi Arabia. And the fear of some clubs was that Newcastle United would sign a series of sponsorship arrangements with companies that are not directly linked to the owner and not directly linked to companies that the owner happens to own, the Public Investment Fund, but still could be very lucrative. And therefore, the other clubs in the Premier League didn't want Newcastle to be in a position, for want of a better phrase, to do a Chelsea or do a Manchester City and still keep within PSR, because they signed a load of partnership deals with companies presumably in Saudi Arabia or connected in Saudi Arabia, but not directly connected to PIF. So what happened was the Premier League broadened the definition as to who it could stick its beak into with regards to commercial deals. And Manchester City have turned around and said, this is a restraint of trade, because the problem that we now have is that we're constantly looking to try to get new sponsors. If a sponsor has got the choice of, let's say, Bayern Munich and Barcelona and Juventus or Manchester City, if it has to go through a greater set of hoops and a greater set of providing evidence to sign the deal off with Manchester City compared to the other clubs, it will say, forget this for a game of soldiers. We just want the sponsorship deal. We'll go to Bayern, we'll go to Juve. And therefore, it's lost opportunities as far as Manchester City are concerned. So they felt that the new rules were introduced. And this was this legendary phrase, the tyranny of the majority. And initially, I thought that was a bit pompous. But the more I've looked into it, the more I can actually understand Manchester City's position. It's effectively the other clubs, as far as City are concerned, and we know that there is hostility towards City, the other clubs ganging up and saying, okay, we can introduce a rule which really impacts upon Manchester City. If for example, under the Premier League rules, you need 2/3 majority, what happens if 19 clubs introduced a rule that you couldn't play in sky blue shirts? Yeah. That would be the tyranny of the majority. So that's where City are. Now, from what we understand, A, this case has been heard, and B, a verdict has been reached. But if you go into the Premier League handbook, and we've said on regular occasions, don't, you've got lives, you've got personalities, therefore there's no need to look at the Premier League handbook. But under the Premier League handbook is that if there is a case of this nature, the result of it, the verdict, is kept private unless both parties effectively agree to make it public. So we don't know whether the Premier League has decided it wants to keep it private, or Manchester City has decided it wants to keep it private, or indeed both parties. But at the same time as this verdict appears to have taken place, there was a Premier League chief executive meeting scheduled at which the broader issue of bringing in perhaps stronger rules in relation to these associated party transactions was due to be voted on. And all of a sudden, Richard Masters got out his Tipex and scrubbed it from the list of things to be discussed. Yeah. So people put 2 and 2 together and said, well, they can't introduce the rules because Manchester City have won, or they can't introduce the rules because the Premier League has won, and now the Premier League is going to introduce even more restrictive APT rules, so it wants to redraft the rulebook. Simple answer is we don't know. I've put feelers out to senior sources, that our secret citizen and our secret Premier League person, and we're just getting back. We're perfectly happy with the result, but we ain't going to tell you a thing because and which is perfectly right and proper because it's got to stay private. I think it, however, damages the Premier League's position. The Premier League has said on many an occasion, we don't like the regulator for unintended consequences. Well, what we have now is a self-regulating system which has got self-interest and secrecy. I don't think secrecy in football is a good thing. And that's what we have under the current Premier League handbook.
Well, the problem is, Kieran, you have selective secrecy. You have, for the most part, the Premier League being quite secretive until occasionally, and I think this is why the rumours spread over the weekend. This news, which is essentially is an agenda issue, but it was leaked to someone from someone in the Premier League. So it became, you talk about Richard Masters with the tippets, it's almost like he did this with quite the flourish in order that somebody noticed that this item was taken off the agenda. So then, of course, people said, well, the only reason it can have been taken off the agenda is that the 115 cases, which have nothing to do, have already been heard, and the Premier League have lost, so there's no point discussing it. But as you say, we need to stress these things are completely separate issues, because there's no way on God's earth that, we're 2 weeks in, they're probably still discussing issue 1 of the 115, aren't they? But they are separate issues, but it does beg the question, as you say, the Premier League, they will leak stuff when they have to, Kieran. And this seems to me like seems to me like this was an inside. This was something the Premier League, for whatever reason, very much wanted us to know had happened.
Yes, there are briefings. That's the way football is now, very political. As we know from the newspapers, there are briefings from politicians to journalists. There are briefings from select people on all sides of the divide when it comes to stories of this nature. And we are sometimes beneficiaries of those briefings. Sometimes we are not. And we benefit from the show. We sometimes run a story on the basis of a briefing and so on. So it's just messy. And we're very fortunate. We're having our very good friend Nick DeMarco on the show in a few weeks' time. And Nick's been very sort of upfront in saying that sunshine is a great disinfectant for conspiracy theories and so on. If the Premier League's got nothing to hide, if Manchester City have got nothing to hide, then hide nothing and just come out in the public and say, this is what it is. And it could be that it's that both sides do have some form of benefit from it, and both sides can claim a victory. But what we have at present is decisions effectively being, well, decisions, but conclusions being reached via the court of Twitter, which is not, in my experience, 12 good men and true, or even 12 good women and true.
Let's see if Nick DeMarco still holds that opinion after I've bombarded him with conspiracy theories in a couple of weeks' time. I've decided not to ask any sensible questions. I'm just going to throw him loads of conspiracy theories and see how long it takes. Now, there was a time on this pod, Kieran, not too long ago, when we spoke about Birmingham City in hushed and slightly worried terms. They were a club in disarray. They were having ownership issues. They were having points deduction issues. The ground was falling down. And now it seems they're only days away from signing Cristiano Ronaldo and or building solid gold floodlights, Kieran, because they just seem to be out of nowhere. They're awash with cash, Kieran.
That's right. The owners, Knights Head Capital, in conjunction with celebrity endorsements, so they got Tom Brady and I think David Beckham was seen there recently as well. They are generating a lot of cash, and our very good friend, Companies House website, pinged me a series of documents the other day, and it would appear that the investors into Birmingham City Football Club, or rather its quasi-parent company, Shelby Industries, which instantly gets all Brummies with a big smile on their face because of the Peaky Blinders links. And I do think it's such a cool name for a company, has raised more than £100 million in fresh investment. And the reason why that's important is that in League One, and this won't all have happened, but in League One, you don't have PSR rules in the same way that you have as far as the Premier League and the Championship is concerned, where you can lose a set amount of money. What you're allowed to do is that for every £100 that you generate from ticket sales, from TV and commercial, you can spend £60 on player wages. But then they also have something called the football fortune rule, And this says for every £1 you make, A, from your cup runs, B, from player sales, and C, I don't think anybody ever envisaged this, from money put into the club by the owners in the form of shares. For every £1 you put in, you can spend £1 on wages. So Birmingham's owners put £100 million in. That means, in theory, they could spend £100 million in wages. They won't do that. But some of that money is going to renovate and upgrade St Andrews. And that would be great. As an away fan who's been there, love going there. But it could do with more than just a lick of paint. So that's good news. But it does mean that people have queried how Birmingham City have managed to spend so much money in the transfer market. And also, I've been leaked by one of our secret agents. I don't believe how much he's on in League One. Okay, holy moly! We are. I think they will have possibly the highest ever wage bill in the history of League One on the back of this. Although when Sunderland were receiving parachute payments a couple of years ago, that's the target they've got to aim at.
Kieran, it's not a target. How many times have you told me it's not a target?
That's true. That's true. Fair comment.
You say our very good friend Company's House, Kieran, but they're not pinging me anything in the morning. I could, at best, I'm a friend of Company's House, to be perfectly honest, Kieran. I'm perfectly happy to keep it that way. We both have. I hate admitting to having a soft spot for any other football club, so I'm not going to say I've got a soft spot for them, but let's say I don't hate them the way I hate most other clubs. They are throwing the kitchen sink at this, Kieran, which I admire. But as somebody who spent a lot of time in Birmingham, in Quinton, I think we can say that the words cheery optimism are not the first that you associate. They're certainly not the first that you associate with the good people of Quinton, in particular my in-laws' ex neighbour Sandy, who literally you'd say to him in the morning, "Nice day, Sandy, it won't last." I wonder if for some Birmingham fans, is there a cause for not pessimism, but is there a worry that if this doesn't work, or if they get into the Championship, they won't be able to, as you say, because of the rules, they won't be able to maintain the same level of investment in an attempt to stay in the Championship. So I don't mean to urinate on anybody's chips here, Kieran, but are there potential problems in future? Are we sure that Shelby, Kirkwood, whatever, are able to sustain this?
Well, if they're having a party this season in League One, the Birmingham City, and you've got to look at the way that the crowds have responded.
Absolutely.
Spectacular attendances that they're getting. Yeah. After a good party, there's a big hangover. And depending upon how much money they do lose this year, that will have an impact upon their ability to spend in the Championship if they go up. And nothing is guaranteed in football, but they've made a very good start. And talking to people that we know at other clubs, I think the viewpoint taken by the other 23 clubs, it's Birmingham +1 for promotion, and then we'll sort out the playoffs. So I think a lot of the other clubs have effectively narrowed down promotion prospects because Birmingham are so far ahead in terms of the budget. But that will have consequences. So you're absolutely right to say that, for want of a better phrase, you can buy yourself out of National League, you can buy yourself out of League Two, and you can buy yourself out of League One, but you can't do the same. So if Birmingham have lost a lot of money this season, and they might not because they're selling out St Andrews, they've got much more high-profile sponsorship deal, so they've got much more money coming in as well, which I think people are choosing to ignore. If they had made losses, that will go into their PSR calculation in the Championship next season.
If we've talked about Birmingham a lot, Kieran, in recent months we've talked about football website Sorare an equal amount, and this is a new story, Kieran, that you've been predicting would happen for quite some time.
Yeah, Sorare are the football tokens website. I think when I, myself and Joey Durso, who's now at the Times and was at the Athletic, we both gave evidence to a parliamentary committee around about 18 months ago in respect of non-fungible tokens and sport. And prior to that, Sorare had been in contact and they'd invited me to a match into hospitality for free. And I said, I don't think I can do that because my nickname's not No Free Gear Kier for nothing. And And I also politely pointed out that Brighton are playing that day. Why would I go to the Emirates to watch an Arsenal match where I can't wear a football shirt, I can't swear, and I can't see my team? And they didn't seem to get that. And then at this parliamentary hearing, myself and Joey was very, very eloquent. I was a bit more urban. They didn't turn up to defend themselves. They were invited. They chose not to give evidence. And then they put out a press release to say, very, very sniffy press release to say that the evidence given to the parliamentary committee was lacking objectivity and so on. And I was a little bit peeved by that for two reasons. First of all, they were invited and they chose not to attend. And secondly, as an academic, you do pride yourself on the fact that on a personal level, I think their magic beans are worthless. Doesn't mean that you can't see the benefits on the broader issues. And I've said on more of an occasion, I like the blockchain. I think it protects artists. I think it protects an awful lot of people in terms of transactions. I don't really see the benefits of these tokens and some of the other issues in relation to the broader world of crypto. But you've got to look at each issue in turn. So they were a bit arsey. But what has now happened is that the Gambling Commission has charged them for providing unlicensed gambling facilities. And again, one of the questions that I was asked by an MP was, is it a gambling offering? And I said, well, in my view, it's sort of gambling with a small g. And then another question that was asked of us, is it a Ponzi scheme? And I said, well, it's not got all of the characteristics of a Ponzi scheme, but it appears to have some of the characteristics. And it's not for me to reach a conclusion as to whether it's not, but I would urge caution for anybody that doesn't like Ponzi schemes.
What would be the outcome of this charge, Kieran, if it's shown to be true?
Well, they could be fined. They might be restricted in terms of their ability to advertise their products. They don't have a license as such because they're not a pure gambling organisation. Or it could be that the Gambling Commission says, we believe that so much of your operations are gambling in nature that we believe you come under the umbrella of the Gambling Commission, and then you've got to apply for a formal licence, and therefore you are subject to greater regulatory scrutiny.
Again, more proof of your honourableness, Kieran, your integrity with that lovely expression, no free gear, Kia. But if there are people out there willing to offer, I'm happy to be called Happy Not to Pay Day. We take a different approach to that sort of thing here on this pod. For those of a certain age, Kieran, we can all remember some glorious nights for Welsh football clubs in Europe, and they've got a plan for bringing that back. Well, at least the EFL Welsh clubs have.
Yes, I think TNS are the Welsh Cup champions. With the expansion of UEFA's competitions, we now have more clubs who are playing in the Europa League, in the Europa Conference, and so on. And it's actually quite beneficial financially. UEFA have increased the amount of money. The Swiss-style model has gone down well with sponsors. And we're recording this on early Wednesday evening. Liverpool are playing Bologna today. And I've seen loads of Bologna fans in the city centre. They all seem happy. The Liverpool fans seem happy. There's an extra home game on the back of this. Liverpool will make more money. So the only people who are not entirely happy about, and I can fully understand their position, is the fact that the players have got to go and play more matches, 2, potentially 4, on the back of this, on top of an expanded Nations League and an expanded FIFA Club World Cup. So we've been through that particular issue. And now I think the likes of Swansea and Cardiff and Wrexham say, well, hold on, geographically, we are a Welsh football club. Having done the sums and seen the financial benefits of getting to the Europa Conference, 4 home games against European opposition, an entry fee of a couple of million quid, hundreds of thousands if we win individual matches. Is there a case for us deciding, actually, let's apply to enter the Welsh Cup? And from a business point of view, you can understand how seductive that is. If I was the coach of Cardiff and Swansea, I would imagine my priority is to get into the playoffs and to try to get promoted to the Premier League. So having these additional fixtures, you can understand, it's already 46 matches in the Championship. You add on another 4, plus, FA Cup and Carabao Cup. It's all looking pretty big. But the money men are saying, well, you do the sums. And also, we have established that to get through to the next round, effectively, you should be able to do this with 7 points from 8 games to get into the top 24 of these knockout phases. It does become quite seductive, and therefore, I believe it's something that they're thinking. Now, how the Welsh FA will respond by saying, well, hold on, you need to go and play in the Welsh League in order to do that. So we await developments, I think is the polite phrase.
You almost completely took the words out of my mouth. I was going to be more robust than await developments, because there are certainly people in the Welsh FA who take exactly that view. You want a Welsh place in European football, you play in the Welsh League. I think there are also people in UEFA and FIFA who have taken that view historically. Now, last week, Kieran, we had nothing but bad news for Reading fans, and we saw yet again another well-organised and completely non-violent demonstration at their home match against Huddersfield this week. I don't know how to introduce it. I don't know whether this is good news, Kieran, qualified good news, disastrous news, but they're in talks about a takeover with someone, but they're linked to a certain someone, which I'll let you finish this, Kieran.
I'm furrowing my brow. According to the reports, Reading are in discussions with a Hong Kong-based businessman linked to Dai Yongge, the current owner, fair to say, not very popular owner. We've heard stories that the deal in terms of the takeover with Rob Cohig, that collapsed because Dai Yongge saw his arse when Rob turned up before the deal had been signed off and was seen in Reading, was seen with a Reading scarf, and purely out of spite, Yongge made things, just changed the terms to make it really impossible for that deal to go ahead. So we don't know whether that was perhaps jumping the gun or whether Rob Cohig found something that he didn't like as part of due diligence. Some of the sleuths, and there are some really good sleuths, have looked at this relationship between this businessman and Dai Yongge and are twitchy about it. If we go back to, and I don't want to oversimplify, and also don't want to come across as xenophobic in any way, shape or form here, but if you take a look at what happened with Wigan Athletic, when there was a Chinese owner who sold Wigan Athletic to Al Young, and then 3 weeks later, Mr. Young put the club into administration, you do concern yourself that this Hong Kong businessman, is this part of a broader business relationship with Dai Yongge, and Reading Football Club effectively is the white elephant part of the deal, in the sense that it's an unwanted add-on to, and gets rid of a problem as far as Dai Yongge is concerned, and all that's going to happen is that problem is going to be inherited by somebody else who's got no interest in Reading Football Club and doesn't want to take the club to a position of sustainability, a position where Reading fans can go to bed at night and not worry, and so on.
In terms of the speculation as to why the Cohig deal fell through, Kieran, the rather brilliant Mark Clement on 5 Live, who knows more about football outside the Premier League than anyone's entitled to know, Kieran, it's astonishing. It's like Ed and I watching TNT last night, this Italian football expert. You go, I couldn't name you, even including Palace, I don't think I could name you a full squad of one Premier League English team. And this guy's just got intimate knowledge of every single player in Italian football. Mark Clement has that with the EFL and the National League. And I stress he was speculating here, but this is an informed opinion. He thinks that what happened at Reading is that the 7-8 million or whatever it was that they got from Palace for the sell-on of Elise just made Dai Yongge go, well, that's bought me another 3 months of wages, so sod you, I'll keep this going, essentially. Whether that's true that he did it out of malice or whatever, I don't know, but it's an easy link to make, isn't it, between that money coming in and that deal falling through, basically. And somebody else is in for a bit of money, Kieran, by the look of it, is York City.
Yes, this is a club which has been through some ownership changes, and we had somebody from for York City supporters on the podcast
We did.
a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And we both like York City because we remember the old Admiral kit with the Y on it, which was and
maroon with a white Y. Oh, fantastic! Yeah,
it's proper football kit.
Yeah.
Proper football. And I think we've got an interview lined up with Admiral in the next few weeks
with Mr. Theo Hamburger.
Theo Hamburger,
Yeah.
That's right. I'm asking, is that part of their legacy range that they might be putting out again? I know they've still got they're producing the Coventry famous shirt, 1975 to 80, which was great. Sadly, they don't seem to be selling the chocolate brown away kit with the matching shorts, which was a thing of true beauty, in my opinion. But this is where being colourblind probably gives me a complete new dimension of the world to anybody with any taste.
I remember one of the Coventry players in the interview asked about that iconic kit. He went, iconic? He said he wants to wear brown shorts, which is essentially. So, but anyway, having established our mutual admiration for York City's kits in the 70s, Kieran, what's the good news?
Oh, the good news is that the boss of a US private equity company has decided that he might dip his toe in. And I think this is, once again, is a ripple effect from Welcome to Wrexham, in the sense that you could buy the club for single millions in all probability, and on the back of that, if you invest enough, as we said earlier, you can buy yourself out of the National League relatively cheaply and take things from there. My one issue with a lot of what we are seeing from American investors is that they see the success of Wrexham, which has been fantastic, and what it's done for the town is absolutely great. And they think, we can replicate that. But what they don't realise is that they're not Deadpool.
Yeah.
They're not Ryan and McElhenney, whose incredible force of personality has helped to generate interest in Wrexham as a football club and Wrexham as a destination, because it's now people want to do the Wrexham tours for all of the place which is on the show, which is fantastic. As somebody that was at the Fans United match at Wrexham many, many years ago, as somebody that ran a double glazing company in Wrexham, which had gone into administration, I love the place because the people are funny, the people are self-deprecating, but it's part of the country which has been hit in terms of post-industrial decline of the UK, and that's a much broader issue. So I'm delighted for them. Can this model be replicated elsewhere? Well, we've seen Birmingham go down the celebrity endorsement route. I think if this private equity guy is thinking again, no disrespect, I'm sure he's a super smart bloke. Nobody's interested in bankers. Nobody says, that's his favourite ATM machine, or that's his favourite branch of Starbucks in York. You're not going to be picking up the tourist dollar or getting increased interest. So unless he's got some parties and co-investors who can accelerate interest in York, then I think it's going to be an expensive exercise for him.
Well, York's full of tourists, Kieran, and rightly so. It's an amazing city, so it shouldn't be beyond their realms of imagination to send some of them down the road to, I'm fairly certain it's not Bootham Crescent anymore. But the fear is, of course, Kieran, as you rightly indicate, that start of next season, US private equity firm invests massively in York City or buys it, does a lovely tour of the pitch, holding the York scarf above his head. 2 seasons later, they're still in the National League. He's not getting much return on his money, and off he goes again because it hasn't worked out like Wrexham.
Yeah, and private equity people, they're ruthless. Their interest on bottom line is far greater than their interest in soccer ball.
Yeah. Two more stories, Kieran, one of which I really wasn't expecting to have to mention. And this time last week, it looked like we weren't going to, because if we had nothing but bad news for Reading fans last week, it appeared that we had almost nothing but good news for Inverness Caledonian Thistle fans. But we jumped the gun, clearly.
Yes, ICT are, according to reports, they are 2 weeks from administration. They have launched a crowdfunding campaign trying to raise £200,000 in that period. They've already made contact with accountants who work in the administration industry. And that's sort of the process that we used to go through. So before a business went into administration, you couldn't sneak in because you stood out like a sore thumb, but you'd be having meetings with management, you'd be going through budgets, you'd be looking at the order book, you'd be trying to see if there was a solution which didn't involve administration, because people think, oh, the administrators are in it for the money. You can make your money in various ways, and not having the constraints of administration can be advantageous. It's only when you think, well, actually, there are no other routes to go down. So what will be happening now, if these people have been employed, is that's what they'll be doing. They'll be looking at the cash flows in respect of ICT. Are there any ways that costs can be cut? Are there any other revenue opportunities in the very short term, in the medium term, and so on? And if that doesn't come to fruition, then they've got an interim chair at present, and he's been very brutal in terms of his comments and say, but we're losing a lot of money. We haven't got any money ourselves to prop up the club. So we have to consider all options, one of which is administration. And I think that would be really sad for the club. In 2023, they lost around about 600 grand. Looks like those losses have doubled in 23-24, and they're predicting similar for 24-25. Some people have stepped in historically, but there's only so many times that you can put out the begging bowl and somebody will come to the good. And there are been some incredibly supportive people in respect of Inverness Cali Thistle, but are we reaching a change in position here?
The reason, though, that this is surprising, Kieran, and I thought would never have to read this out, is it did look a week or so ago that they had a possible credible buyer, with the caveat that we thought the money he was offering for the club was way too low. So clearly that's either he wasn't as credible as we thought, or the money was way too low.
Yeah, I mean, distressed assets go for distressed prices.
Okay. So
that is always a consideration. It creates uncertainty. And I know some people will say, well, footballers are paid too much. Well, I know the wages in Inverness Cali Thistle. They're not big wages, I can assure you. And as we've always said, football is a transient industry. Players can move from club to club, but it's the other people. It's the locals who work in the ticket office, who work in the club bar and so on, who work in the canteen, who are involved with the academy and so on. It's those people who stand to lose the most in an area where jobs are not. You can't just move from job to job because there aren't huge numbers around.
Before our last story, Kieran, I'd like to direct our lovely listeners to an interview we have for them tomorrow with Conrad Kirkwood, who's president of the IFA. That would be why I threw the word Kirkwood randomly into the Birmingham story for no apparent reason, Kieran. Just subconsciously percolated around my head. We spent 40 minutes chatting to him. It was a really, really interesting interview about the problems and the delights of running the FA of Northern Ireland, from the highest level to the very lowest level. So I think anybody with any interest in football should listen to that. Not just football finance, but also the pressures and the mental strains that can come with a job of that level. Our last story, though, Kieran, is a good news one, and it's also potentially a source of optimism for Inverness Caledonian Thistle, because it does prove that large amounts of money can be raised through crowdfunding. And it's a story from AFC Wimbledon that started very badly, but out of which has come some uplifting, positive responses, I think.
Yes, we were at Wimbledon's ground 2 weeks ago when you did your magnificent charity walk, and it's got to be said there, the staff there were so friendly, and we got to meet a real Womble, which was absolutely fantastic. And we went out.
Yeah, I hate to break this to you, Kieran, but we got to meet Hayden the Womble, which was lovely. But I'm slightly worried, Kieran. It was our fault. I'm paranoid. You and me and Hayden the Womble were the last people on that pitch before this terrible thing happened to it. They told us that the groundsman was perfectly happy for us to be there. He didn't look happy, Kieran, did he? He wasn't holding that pitchfork with the demeanour of a happy man. Luckily, he's got well, not luckily, but he's got worse things to worry about. But this story, it's a well publicised story, Kim. But you tell us how much they've raised, and it does. Again, it's one of those stories we always like to tell because it does indicate the generosity and family feeling of people in the game of football, because it's not just the 15 grand that Newcastle donated, but Wimbledon issued and I realise I'm telling your story for you now, Kim, but Wimbledon issued a list of all the clubs, and it went down to Sunday League level, really. There's hundreds of clubs all over the country with no relation to AFC Wimbledon at all, but all chipped in a little bit to help them.
Yeah, and again, you and I are gentlemen of a certain age, and we can also remember the legacy story of Wimbledon and Dickie Guy, and how they got from non-league to the equivalent of the Premier League, and how they won the FA Cup with Laurie Sanchez, of course, scoring the goal. And I saw a picture on LinkedIn only 3 or 4 days ago. It was Laurie with Vinnie Jones and Dave Besant, all looking beaming smiles, which was good to see at an event. But you're absolutely right. Fans have come together, and I think a lot of fans, especially fans of the smaller clubs, say, "Well, crumbs, that was a sinkhole. We saw it. Very messy. Wimbledon lost the opportunity to play at home against Newcastle, which their fans would have really enjoyed. But Newcastle, fair play to them for putting in 15 grand, but they've raised £120,000 in total through crowdfunding, and again shows the initiative of fans. I think it was a fan who said, right, let's go and do this. Money's come from all over, because you don't want any club to go into that position. And I cringe at times when the phrase "the football family" is mentioned, but I think this is a perfect example of taking a collegiate approach, take a community approach, and making sure that Wimbledon could come back to playing matches at their home ground ASAP.
I was at Selhurst Park here the night they lost to Leeds United in the replay. They took Leeds United to a draw at Ellen Road. It was a Southern League team. They took the mighty Leeds United to a draw. I think they'd already beaten Burnley, who were also in the first division at the time. I think there's about 45,000 people at Selhurst Park for that replay. And I remember actually seeing Dickie Guy. There'd been a photograph of Dickie Guy saving a penalty at Ellen Road. And now here he was at Selhurst Park, a goalkeeper with a beard. It's like watching an action man on those were the sort of days, Kieran, when entertainment was so limited. If you saw a goalkeeper with a beard, you were blown away. And then just 5 years later, Palace had a goalkeeper doing handstands on the crossbar. My God, what a world to live in, Kieran. Incredible. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you, and it'll get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on our regular Tuesday question show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter X. You can find us on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to buy our book, which is just out in paperback now, you can find details on our website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Tuesday for that next questions pod. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
As always, thank you for getting in contact. It's amazing the ingenuity of some of our listeners. So we're recording this on a Wednesday, and a St Johnstone fan who has sent in 2 questions, apparently, decided he was going to circuit break the questions pod by asking me a question directly on Twitter with regards to the financial gap between St Johnstone and Celtic and Borussia Dortmund. So I think this is a sign of my naivety. I thought that was quite an innocent question. So I put out an answer. I think it said something like 200,000 views on Twitter in about 6 or 7 hours. I've been phoned up by the Dundee Courier or the Dundee Bugle. And clearly there are so many layers of Scottish football that we Southerners don't understand. But Celtic fans are saying, why did you even bother to answer him? I'm going, well, if somebody asks me a question, I'm so polite, that's what I do. But yeah, clearly opened a bit of a can of worms there. So thank you for getting in contact. Just a reminder, we are now 2 weeks away from our show at Balham, and I think there's a couple of tickets still remaining. So this is for the Cheerful Earful Comedy Festival. We are the last show on at night, so if you want to come along, there's plenty of other fantastic shows on during the festival as well. So you can get absolutely bladdered beforehand and then just sing along to the amortization song. Kevin's looking slightly surprised about the amortization song. Well, we've not written it yet, but Lennon and McCartney managed to knock out an album very quickly. We can do one song well in a fortnight. So we are doing that, and we can confirm that we are also appearing at the Brighton Utilitarian Church because we're doing a benefit gig for Samaritans. I think that's something like Friday the 15th of November, and the tickets are just about to be announced to go on sale in the next day or so. It would be great if you come along, support a fantastic cause, and we will put on the best show that we can for you, as always, and we'll try and get some guests as well.
When you say the last show at the Cheerful Earful, Kieran, you make it sound very rock and roll. You make it sound a bit like Hendrix going on at Woodstock at 3 o'clock in the morning, when in fact the last show is 8 o'clock. So it's less exciting. And also, I'm interested in the Dundee Bugle, because I've heard you talk about Uncle Terry and the Bermondsey Bugle, but I had no idea that was a newspaper. Bye, everybody.
Moving swiftly on. Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.